10 years as the God of War franchise basically had played its course as one of Sony's biggest flagship game titles, somehow, having played this glorious, action-packed, bloody and brutal, slash after slash, violence after violence franchise, the game eventually gave its fans gamers fatigue, as any game with that kind of gameplay and quantity of releases would. And the matter of fact is that we've basically witnessed and experienced firsthand what had felt like a decade's worth of Kratos going through his endless hack and slash journey of vengeance, leaving behind a bloody sea of corpses, physically and metaphorically. In that sense, after the almost definitive conclusion of the third God of War, with Kratos having quote unquote redeemed himself through forgiveness of oneself, coupled with him literally dragging Zeus' spirit back into his body and beating the god out of the Olympus' psychotic and manipulative ruler, fans and developers alike felt that the book had reached its final chapter and that the ending of the game basically closed that book. And so, when Santa Monica Studios announced a new God of War way back in 2014 at the inaugural PlayStation experience, fans of the franchise themselves, including me of course, were both overjoyed yet understandably skeptical of the game in development, having established through lore as well as widely assumed by the players that the story had been concluded, since as I've just mentioned and as players of the game had already witnessed for themselves, which we of course were responsible for, Kratos had literally murked everyone and everything in his blind and unrelenting path towards self-fulfilling vengeance, with the Greek mythology world itself seemingly reaching doomsday based on the last cutscene of the game. Nevertheless, hardcore fans of the game such as myself felt that the God of War franchise is one of those few unique titles that had almost always delivered what it sought to deliver. From gameplay to plot
Ares! Destroy my enemies, and my life is yours.
to story
We are not finished, Zeus.
Death cannot hold those with purpose, Kratos.
to the overall gaming experience, God of War games were always memorable to say the least, which meant that whatever God of War game they give to us, it was going to be something worth waiting and standing for.
We have worked a really long time. Everybody's put a tremendous amount of themselves into this game.
And so, in 2018, after months of speculation and an eventual mind-blowing trailer accompanied by an orchestra, God of War 4 was released to the fans and the entire gaming world, and to say that the game was flawless is an understatement. So in essence, the fourth installment of the series is a quote-unquote reimagining.
What are you guys calling this game? Would you call it a reinvention? What is the internal terminology for how you're approaching the new God of War?
We took a while to kind of arrive at that. It's a reimagining,
I
right?
think I'm calling it massive.
Massive, yeah. Too big.
Sorry.
At least that's how I saw it, with the game feeling like an overhaul of the previously created lore and Kratos' established status quo in many ways. Yet, regardless of this overhaul, this new game still redeemed the heart and soul of the franchise, as at its core, this brooding, violent killing machine is deep down still the infamous and lovable Ghost of Sparta that we all know and love. And while the word reimagining has been overused at this point when it comes to games, the way God of War 4, aka Dad of War, was reimagined was something that many players did not expect at all, me included. Shifting from the Greek mythology to the Norse mythology, the game itself provides the players a completely new yet familiar experience on how the game will be presented moving forward. And hold on to that phrase moving forward, because those two words shall be instrumental to the game's drive, as both in story and in general, the series feels like a journey of progress, a path towards change, and a story not of vengeance but of closure. Not only is the concept moving forward instrumental to the game, in all honesty, it's also the reason why, after years since the game release, I've now only decided to share my own thoughts and experiences about this game. See, in all honesty, I was actually late to this party, having only played God of War 4 around the year 2020 or so, roughly 4 years since the game was actually released, when I played it on my PC. Before that, I basically didn't have any valuable know-how about the game, about its mechanics, about the story, about basically anything about its gameplay. And thus, I came in knowing absolutely nothing about the game other than the previous notions I had about it back when I played the original God of War trilogy. And so, that was what I was expecting. However, as we all know now, after playing the game, the fourth installment was a vastly different thing compared to its predecessors. And while I obviously loved the mechanics, the platforming, and the pacing of the previous titles in the franchise, something about God of War 4 just stuck with me. From its serene and lush world to its calming soundtrack, I was immediately hooked. As soon as I started playing the game, moonlighting as Kratos with my son Atreus, aka Boy, I was excited. And when we started hunting a deer, I knew I was in for a long ride. From the get-go, the game presented an intense yet compelling gameplay, even just hunting deer. I had a hint of the story that I was about to experience just by witnessing the dynamic between Kratos and Boy. And of course, when we eventually caught up to the deer, it sort of gave me the sigh of relief. Only to get fucking jump scared by a fucking troll. And I can honestly assume that I was probably the only person who got jump scared by the troll because, as I've established, I was so emotionally into the game. And this is where the theme of moving forward really stuck with me, even early on into the game. See, there's a reason I got fucking jump scared by the fucking troll. And it was because, really, before the troll grabbed the deer, there was this beautiful yet painfully agonizing scene of Kratos and Atreus. The scene with Kratos hesitating and just eventually deciding not to pat his son on the back for catching and ending the deer. To most gamers who encountered that scene, that would have been just a normal scene. But to someone who has some deep emotional scars and trauma when it comes to dealing with their parents, such as what I went through, it was much, much deeper. Because it was from there and then on, I realized that there was a deeper reason why I suddenly came across this game and had the urge to play it after like years and years of not playing the original God of War trilogy. And the reason was that I was unknowingly about to get a much more comprehensive understanding of masculinity and how it greatly affects the dynamics between father and son. But hold on, before you start commenting about forced wokeness or whatever, this isn't about that. Not at all. What I meant is that being someone who has a decent but not the ideal type of relationship with his own father, throughout my journey in God of War 4 being Kratos and going through the adventure of fulfilling Faith's wish, I slowly but surely developed a better understanding of my own personal journey and what I had to actually need to do and go through to be better and to stop feeling things that I was previously feeling, that of harboring some type of anger and resentment towards my father. But before I get too deep, let's pivot away from the personal feelings I have and get back to the God of War's gameplay, because I assure you, there's never a shortage of things to talk about when it comes to the gameplay of God of War. Gameplay wise, God of War 4 succeeded on introducing what this game aimed to make its players, new and veterans alike, experience: raw and organic change and progress. Interestingly enough, the game cleverly starts with Kratos chopping down a tree with a golden handprint, a symbol which we gamers of the God of War 4 shall learn the meaning of later on. From the get go, we as players are already pulled into the heartful weight that this game carries. The opening scene is eerie, surreal, emotional, yet it never strays too far from the soul of the game. It's accompanied by a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack, with the most significant part being the introduction of its co-protagonist, Atreus, adding an element of innocence and playfulness to the gist of the story. However, Atreus doesn't just add a new element to the gameplay by being a companion, a helping hand in combat, and an assistant to some puzzles to Kratos, as well as to bounce off dialogue. No, there's so much more to it.
I know how to read, boy. Just not this tongue.
You're halfway there already then. Okay, so the runes represent a lot of different things. Some gods, some animals.
What Atreus serves is also a part of what makes God of War such a compelling game and concept to think about. But let's set this premise up. Let's rewind back to over a decade. See, as you know, the original God of War game was released in 2005, roughly a 13-year gap from the fourth entry to the series. What this means is that 13 years have also passed since we God of War players started hacking and slashing and platforming as our favorite god killer, that is Kratos, the ghost of Sparta. And 13 years is a long time. That's a really long time. Most of us who started playing the original God of War back then on either PlayStation 2 or on PSP or even on emulators are probably grown up now with their own lives, families, friends, and all of that. And this is where Atreus comes in. As I've mentioned, I, like most people around the world, had a not so ideal type of relationship with my parents. For me, what Atreus signifies is an obvious yet underappreciated aspect of this 2018 release, that the game has moved on and moved forward together with its players. When you think about it, we are no longer the reckless, careless, and merciless psychopaths that we once were, mindlessly hacking and slashing our way through life with our own burning blades of chaos, being indifferent or even disgustingly proud towards the consequences of our actions. Now, we, the generation of kids and teens who played the original God of War, are extremely different people from who we were back then, for better or worse, and hopefully for the better. I can simply assume that each and every one of us here who have played God of War back in 2005 have all experienced the pains, rainbows, the bliss and the heartbreaks, and the hopefulness and miseries that life gives us. From our own personal traumatic moments that left us feeling broken down and hopeless, to witnessing our heroes fall and become the ones to break our hearts, to failing at life, or to simply be humbled by the world. For me, what Atreus poignantly represents is the fact that, now, we players have learned. We may not be the types of people that we once aspired to be, God knows I'm not, because that rarely happens in life. But now, despite everything, despite all of that I have mentioned, we are hardened and we are learning a subtle concept that our game's lead protagonist shall also be slowly undergoing throughout our wonderful and emotional playtime. From its opening, God of War 4 never lets up on the subtle expositions, with even Kratos himself giving us players an elusive yet blunt statement of how moving forward should be, stating, "Everything is different, boy. Try not to dwell on it." Giving a hint that, although yes, this is a God of War game, it is also a redefining of what the players assume this game would be, as we've already established. In such a brief moment, we are given enough time to see, listen, feel, explore, and just to take in each and every aspect of this new gameplay. Not only does Kratos and the world look extremely different from what we are used to from the trilogy, we are also introduced to our new favorite tool, with Kratos' new weapon being the Leviathan Axe, replacing the game's iconic Blades of Chaos that Kratos usually wielded. Now, when you think about it, this decision to change weapons would have been a monumentally controversial and bad choice on the part of the game developers. Because the fact is that Kratos and his Blades of Chaos are basically synonymous with one another, especially for those that binged the original games over and over like myself. It was hard to imagine Kratos and not see him murk some monsters with those fiery chains spinning around and slashing everything in sight. Yet somehow, it worked, as the axe feels natural and honestly satisfying to use not only in combat but in other aspects of the game. Not to mention the axe throwing mechanics paired with an axe recall that is super addictive. And for me, even this new weapon of choice serves as a much deeper sentiment than just a tool within Kratos' new adventure. With the game literally starting with Kratos chopping down a tree with the axe, this shows the new life that Kratos is creating. See, in Norse mythology, the axe symbolizes various concepts, the most striking of which is the concept of divine authority, where the axe serves to protect and create while simultaneously showing strength, resilience, and the indomitable spirit. And we all know just how indomitable Kratos' spirit truly is. But beyond those traits, what the Leviathan axe also symbolizes is a subtle yet direct opposition to Kratos' patented and iconic weapon, his Blades of Chaos. See, beforehand, in the three previous God of War titles, we've seen Kratos more or less just mindlessly destroy and rampage everything in his path, as what the Blades of Chaos are meant for. As the name suggests, Blades of Chaos, the weapon, its purpose is simple: cause chaos and destruction, unmindful of the death and heartbreak you'll leave behind your wake of blind rage. On the other hand, we have the Leviathan axe. While this new weapon is obviously not your usual axe, it still works like an axe more or less, meaning Kratos fulfills its purpose of being an axe by chopping down trees and creating new things. In this case, at the start of the game, we can clearly see the things Kratos created with the axe. We can see a boat, which we can assume was crafted by Kratos. After that, we see him and Atreus go home to a cabin, which we can also assume was constructed by Kratos. And lastly, we see Kratos using the tree he chopped down with his axe as the last part of the burial ritual he and his son needed to send off his beloved wife, Faye. While this act in itself isn't creation in an obvious sense, what it does achieve is to create a new status quo and signify a new life for both Kratos and Atreus, as they let go of the physical construct of Faye as a wife, as a mother, and as a real living person. With that, we see them proceed into a new spirited sense of moving forward with their lives, all of which perpetuated by the symbolic axe cutting. Not only that, one more beautiful and symbolic aspect about the Leviathan axe is its recall mechanic. While returning or coming back is a bit contradictory to the concept of moving forward, the Leviathan axe actually further compounds on Kratos' journey of progress. See, what the axe signifies, for me, when it returns to Kratos is the importance of consistently and constantly getting back to your true self despite undergoing change. Despite moving forward, it's always crucial to keep returning to your innate soul, signifying that no matter how much you should change for the better or worse, it should never be at the risk of losing who you really are. Aside from those sentiments, of course, God of War is just simply an awesome game to play and immerse yourself into. The game provides the players a chance to explore Kratos' hand-to-hand combat skills, as this mode has its own perks and unique purpose in battles, giving us the glimpse of the wonderful combat mechanics of the game. God of War 4 almost immediately gives us a boss battle in the form of Baldur, which is basically a God of War tradition wherein the game introduces a big battle even in its early stages of the game. And speaking of immersing yourself into the game, from the get-go, God of War 4 picks up the pace in both gameplay and storytelling, making it feel like the game itself is never just plot driven, but that every scene, every introduction, every result has their own place and purpose in the general landscape. There is a sense of world building in the open world setting of the game, which is heavily felt through exploration, coupled with the expositions and stories learned all throughout the stages of the game, all of which add significant meaning to the God of War experience. Delving further into the gameplay, the enemies, although mildly repetitive in characterization, never truly feel dull and forced. This is due to the variety of enemy characters and their moves, as well as the many challenges that the set of enemies give the players, making the game almost always like there is always something at stake in every stage of the gameplay. The actual boss battles themselves are interesting in many ways as it tests out the capabilities of the players as well as the things that the players are learning throughout the game, with the Valkyries being the highlight and peak of God of War 4's gameplay. God of War is an almost limitless experience for the player when it comes to the actual aspect of playing the game, as there is almost always something to do, whether it be combat, traversal, or farming, or the puzzles, all of which again have purpose and weight in the game. Significantly, one of the best aspects of the gameplay is the addition of Atreus to the combat and puzzles, as our second character never feels insignificant in any setting, be crucial to most, if not all, stages of the gaming experience, whether it be his arrow shots, or his runes, or the possible combos that the players can do with Kratos and Atreus. Now, when it comes to the story, the game never runs short of it. The lore that comes within the game is as captivating as it gets. God of War 4's story is masterfully layered, taking much inspiration from the Norse mythology and adding or changing parts of the true lore to further compound on the gravity of the story of the game itself. In its foundation, God of War 4 is simply about a father and son going on a journey to the highest peak in the land to scatter the ashes of their wife and mother respectively. The story of God of War itself is basic, yet the whole game has managed to carve out a compelling narrative throughout the timeline of the game. This is achieved through the genuine effort of the writing team managing to put sincerity into the tone of the game, being able to craft a world through the existing lore, and giving almost each and every character of the game depth and purpose. Candidly speaking, this game has one of the greatest stories in all of video game history. To put it quite simply, God of War never runs out of moments to capture and incite the emotions within the game and from its players. Mentioning the open world setting of the game, it means that there are side quests. But never do these side quests feel like tedious and arduous activities you do to 100% the game. Rather, each and every quest and mission have a place in the grand scheme of God of War 4, being able to tell their own innate tales and narratives, all of which provide the players with a little bit more familiarity to the story and to our main characters.
The cycle ends here. Do not be sorry. Be better.
Subsequently, the conclusion of this game is truly one of the most emotional scenes to be put into a video game. One that is satisfying and rewarding and just emotionally fulfilling for any player. However, despite being that deep and emotional, it never alienates the player in any way. The ending of the game shows Kratos and Atreus reaching the conclusion to their journey and being able to spread face ashes at the highest peak in the 9 realms and fulfilling Kratos' promise. Symbolically, this ending fulfills the last parts of someone's journey of moving forward, which is the aspect of letting go.
Why? Why do you even care? You could have walked away. The Cygolians here must be better than this.
See, before scattering face ashes and letting go of the last remnants of their beloved wife and mother, respectively, Kratos revealed his scars to his son, showing how truth and transparency are prerequisites to becoming better people in the conquest of growing and eventually moving forward.
And you must be better than me. Understand? Say it.
I will be better.
And while I've rambled on about the concept of moving forward for such a long while now, there is an underlying theme to the God of War 4 about the significance of family. It is highlighted in the opening and scattered all throughout the nooks and crannies of the game. From a journey of the father and son learning how to be both father and a son to each other, to bickering brothers being extremely competitive with each other to the point of separation, to the complicated mother and son relationship explored, and even a story about family betrayal. God of War 4 never hides its essence from the player at all, rather, choosing to put front and center the much needed values portrayed by the principles of family. On a personal level, when I played God of War 4, it slowly but surely tugged on my heartstrings. While I do have a good relationship with my father, a man I endearingly refer to as Papa, I immediately knew that the relationship we have is not of the typical and ideal father and son dynamic, which you expect and see in the idealized version of a perfect world. The reason I've thrown about this is the fact that the parallels between my dynamics with my parents and that of Kratos and Atreus have honestly just made me reflect on my own situation. Something that, before playing and finishing God of War, I never thought I needed to undergo. But surely enough, after playing God of War, something in me just clicked, signifying the things that I needed to do and go through. As Kratos stated, we must be better. Looking at the game from a psychological and philosophical level, existing within the undertones of the game are the concepts of growth, acceptance, maturity, unwavering will, grief, and love, which are all genuinely represented within the game through the many characters and storylines. It isn't new or rare for any game to provide such emotional weight to its players. Yet, what the God of War 4 brings is a sense of relevance and familiarity, a message that hits home for many people, whether it be through personal experiences of the players themselves or through the experience by others, all of which have their genuine basis in relation to the story of God of War. And in my case, what God of War has given me is a strangely satisfying journey about my own shortcomings as a son and as a person. What I learned is that for me to actually move forward with my own life, I had to stop looking at my parents as the parents they once were to me when I was a kid, all the way to my teenage formative years and even in my 20s. I realized that for me to get better and to be in a better place mentally and emotionally, I had to start seeing my parents as people, individuals who have their own lives, dealing with their own experiences. A concept I learned from seeing the dysfunction that Baldur had with his mother, as well as with how Kratos was trying to portray himself towards Atreus. All in all, in my book, God of War is one of the most compelling and satisfying games of all time. Never does the game ever forget where it came from. After all, it is still the same Kratos that we have all grown up to love and play. Yet, this game ascends the character from simply being a badass to being human, even if he is technically a god. Summary, when I look back at it now, there's the serenity that I feel about the game, something that I attribute to God of War 4's haunting music and beautiful and lush stage designs. I don't know what it's called because I'm not a game developer. From gameplay to storyline to its characters to its graphics to the performance of the voice actors and even the soundtrack, God of War 4 is a masterpiece. From the moment you pick up the controller to hack the tree to its closing moments, there is a sense of feeling that you are in the right place at the right time, and that the game is just right in every sense imaginable. So that was my emotional introspective take on the 2018 God of War, aka Dad of War, aka Kratos and Boy. This was a project that was years in the making, with the script already done years ago and only receiving a few tweaks and additions here and there. It honestly took me years to have the courage to be vulnerable and upfront with myself and my experiences, and thus have only recorded the script recently. This is basically the first video essay that I narrated myself, one that I am extremely proud of and one that genuinely describes who I am and how I truly feel. I hope and plan to do more content, not just on God of War, not just on video games, but on pop culture in general, and how these aspects mesh with my personal thoughts and reflect on my life experiences. I hope you guys appreciate it. Also, sincere apologies for the shoddy editing and audio. I plan on improving everything I can and giving y'all more better videos that you can enjoy. Meanwhile, I'd like to give thanks to all the YouTubers I took inspiration from and basically copied, as well as the source materials for the clips within this video. Thanks for listening and see you guys on the next one. KX Culture out.